We've all been there. You show up early on Sunday morning, you're feeling good, you got your coffee in hand, you turn on the lights, turn on the soundboard, and you plug your guitar in, tune it up, and you strum your first note, and nothing comes out. Sunday morning disasters are the bread and butter of church musicians, and I'd love to talk about them today. Welcome to Blazing Guitars. So inevitably, if you've been leading worship at a church for any amount of time, you have experienced these Sunday morning disasters. And I think one of the things that can really set a worship team apart is how they respond in those moments. So here are a couple thoughts that I would have on how to prepare for the worst on a Sunday morning. So I think the most important thing in that moment is to define what success looks like. And again, this goes back to how we respond in these situations. The way that we respond in these situations is far more important than the production that comes out of those situations. So make sure that you are able to kind of recenter yourself, make sure that you are able to recenter the band even, and just make it clear that what we're there to accomplish is not to put on an amazing production. We're there to worship the Lord. We're there to help the congregation and help ourselves to turn our eyes onto Him and to recognize that He is holy and that He's worthy of our praise, regardless of what that may look like in that moment. So there's been times where we've shown up at church and our projector is not working and we can't figure it out. And so in those worship moments, this has happened multiple times and I think we finally figured it out. But in those moments, we've had people physically, like literally pull up lyrics on their phones and sing from their phones. And I know that's not ideal, but what we're trying to accomplish is not the perfect worship set in that moment. What we're trying to accomplish is to help encourage our congregation and ourselves to turn our eyes back on Jesus. So defining success in that moment is really, really important because it defines how you respond in it. And if your whole goal is to put on the perfect production, which by the way never happens, then you're going to probably be sorely disappointed. But if in that moment your goal switches and you start focusing more and more on worship and what that actually means, then it gives you freedom to be creative and to actually address the problem and to actually come up with a viable solution versus trying to come up with an unreasonable expectation in that moment. So that's the first thing, is to really define what your expectation and what you're trying to accomplish in that moment is. So the second thing that I would say, and this is far more practical, is bring extra batteries. So I have a little pack here and I'll show you. This is my audio video emergency bag, and in it I have a bunch of different cables and aux cables and connectors and HDMI cables. I even have an Apple TV in here, and I'll provide a link of what's exactly in here down in the description below. So the idea for this came when we had a men's conference and I was in charge of audio video, and there were things that I really got well there, but there was other things that I had completely forgotten, like the capability to record what we were doing. So I started coming up with a master list of things that I needed to do in that moment, and then also start coming up with alternatives and different solutions for different scenarios. So like the Apple TV, for instance, I could plug that into any TV or projector with an HDMI and be able to mirror my screen from my MacBook and have lyrics figured out. So coming up with solutions like that and thinking through small, it doesn't have to be the best. I don't have a $8,000 camera in here, but coming up with solutions that you can use to Frankenstein a scenario is really, really helpful, and to kind of think through those plans. So, we know now if our projector isn't working, then we can have people pull up the lyrics on their phones, and that's actually a pretty viable solution. It's not perfect, it's not seamless, but it gets the job done. So start thinking through those scenarios and scenarios that you've been in, and then maybe come up with a little bag or a plan of how to address those scenarios in the future. So that's been really helpful for me, just having those things thought out and solutions in place for different problems that I face. And then if I face a problem that I haven't thought through before, the success in that is not that event, but it's in preparing for the next event. So it even gives you some more chances of success as you're working through things. So then the third thing that I think would be really helpful is to plan for a couple different personnel scenarios. So just because of summer and because we're in a smaller church, we haven't ran with a full band for a couple months now. And actually this past week was the first time we've had the full band back in swing. So as you're preparing and as you're doing things, if your drummer can't sit in for that week, then still practice and still play as if you were having a drummer, and still plan for the same production quality and the same value as if you had that drummer. Now that means that you get creative with guitars, and that means you get creative with pianos and vocals and arrangements and all this stuff. But what you can do is, as you face those scenarios more and more, you start getting what I like to call the minimal viable product. And so this idea of a vocal and a guitarist being excellent together, and just a vocal and a guitarist, or two vocalists and a guitarist, or two vocalists, a guitarist, a bassist, and a piano player, or a piano player and a guitar player. Come up with these different scenarios that you can still find success in, and shoot for that, and shoot for a standard of excellence even with different people on stage, and kind of a rotating thing. And then what that does is it trains you and your team not to be reliant on a certain scenario, because I think that's where a lot of people can really get stuck in, is that they only know success when all the stars align. And unfortunately, we're all human, and that's not how life works. And so if you can find success in different scenarios and come up with different successful scenarios for you and your team, then it really helps your overall success rate succeed, right? It helps your team function a lot better, because you have a bunch of different ways for your team to succeed. It doesn't have to look like a drummer and an acoustic guitar, an electric guitar, a bass, a piano, and 3 vocals. It can look like a guitarist and a drummer, and that's totally legitimate. So just try to come up with different successful scenarios so that your whole team can function under that. And then the final thing that I would say in all this is to practice. The more practice you have, the more equipped you'll be to handle these types of scenarios. So I remember a week where all the batteries in actually the pilot light in the furnace had gone out, and me and the drummer had to go get new batteries to put into the thermostat so that the pilot light would work, so that the gas wouldn't fill up the building. And we did not have time to run through the songs that Sunday morning. So we had practice on Tuesday and Saturday, so we weren't reliant on Sunday to go perfectly, and we were able to kind of roll with the punches a little bit. So take that idea and practice, and work on being able to roll with the punches, because the more you can do that, the more success you'll have. If you have any questions or would like to discuss this further, feel free to jump into my Discord. It's linked in the description below. As always, there's a bunch of links down there. If you want to look at my audio video emergency kit, or join the Discord, or support me on Patreon, or any of those things, they're all linked in the description below. This stuff is super important to engage in. So I remember when I was younger and leading a high school band, and I would have this recurring nightmare of being on stage and then all my band members just leaving and abandoning me. And I'm not kidding, I had that dream like multiple times. And I finally stopped having it when I realized that I had practiced enough that even if that did happen, it wouldn't be a total disaster, because I'd be able to kind of maintain it even on electric guitar. So that just goes into that practice element. Practice, and try and get to the spot where you yourself can be successful. And even if you don't have electricity, like we lost electricity to our building a couple weeks ago, and fortunately we had an acoustic guitar there, and we just pulled it out and we were able to play and worship. So, make sure that you find successful scenarios that you can engage in, and then walk forward from there. So that's all I have. Thank you so much for watching. We will see you next week.